Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk about an article in the Washington Post that was published yesterday. The title of the article, it's like a long report. I mean, it's unfair to call it an article. It's an investigative journalism report that has taken several months to write, and it has been written by at least three authors. It's titled An Assassination Plot on American Soil Reveals a Dark Side of Modi's India. And let me put it straight away what it's trying to do. It's talking about the Pannu Gate, that I like to call it, the case where the United States has accused Indian intelligence service related people of trying to assassinate an American citizen who India has already designated as a Khalistani terrorist. Anyway, the United States has actually filed a case in one of the federal courts, arguing that that the Indian intelligence agency hired a person who tried to hire a killer to kill Panno. And this case has been going on for now nearly a year, and there is a sister case that is connected with a similar accusation from Canada of a Sikh activist, Nijjar, who was actually killed. Canada has not yet captured the two people there were two people who apparently shot him and ran away. They do not have any suspects, and they have not made any arrests. And Canada continues to maintain that without India's cooperation, they will not be able to complete their investigation. But anyway, this particular article by Washington Post claims to have additional information that was not in the public sphere until now. So they have spoken to various intelligence sources, former and current. So they're talking to people who are currently in intelligence, both here and abroad. And they've also talked to former intelligence force people from India's RNAW, the Research and Analysis Wing, for short purposes. I will keep saying RAW in this discussion. So they basically talk to people who formerly worked for RAW, etc., and they've put up a case. And the point of the article clearly seems to be that it is trying to point a finger at India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, and India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval. So basically, the whole point of this article is to provide some little additional information and essentially argue that the assassination attempt for Panno goes all the way to the top. That is apparently the purpose of this article. So I'm going to go through various parts of the article and show you what it is saying and provide some analysis on this. So it's very interesting what they have done. It's not airtight. They have not produced any direct evidence of either Modi's involvement or Doval's involvement, but they have tried to build a circumstantial case. And so they have built a whole narrative about the new India, and the darker side of India as a result of Prime Minister Modi. It's very, very interesting. And I think it's very important for people in India who are seeking to build close relations with the West, with G7, with Europe. Now people in India were recently very giddy because the Prime Minister of Italy has invited Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the G7 meeting that will be held sometime in the summer in Italy. So if India is going to be making advances, trying to become part of the Western alliance system or building closer trade and other relations with the West, stories like this will come back to haunt it. So before I go any further, please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. So let's look at some of the key elements that the report essentially presents. We already know what the case is. Somebody associated with the Indian government who was identified in the US documents as CC1, which is co-conspirator 1, had tried to hire a guy called Nikhil Gupta, and through him hire a killer to kill Panno in the United States. And Nikhil Gupta went and hired a person who was actually a DEA agent, a Drug Enforcement Agency agent, And eventually the US government lured Nikhil Gupta out of India into Czech Republic, where he was arrested and is waiting to be extradited to the US. He also has been interviewed for hours and hours by US FBI agents who probably deal with counterterrorism. It was a joint operation of the CIA and FBI. So, what this article is trying to say is at the time, Prime Minister Modi was being uh, treated so in such a special fashion at the White House. He was received, and the United States government and Joe Biden went to great lengths to celebrate Prime Minister Modi. At that time, India's intelligence agencies were plotting to kill an American on American soil. The US government takes this very seriously as a violation of US sovereignty, and it also raises questions about India. What kind of a government is it? Words such as transnational repression are now being applied to India, working outside the law, and so on and so forth. So it's raising very serious questions. The United States needs India in its attempt to balance and contain China. And so the United States is now stuck between its strategic need to have India as a partner and also its values of democracy, rule of law, etc. Well, in the last few weeks or few months, the way the United States and Joe Biden's administration has conducted itself with regards to the Israeli response to the terrorist attack by Hamas in Gaza clearly shows that the United States government, when it wants, it can completely overlook rule of law. In fact, this week, the US government and all G7 countries are trying very hard to pressure the International Criminal Court from not issuing warrants against Bibi Netanyahu. So, nevertheless, there is a lot of discussion about US values versus US strategic needs with regards to India. But what is new in this article? There are several things that are new. Number one, the thing that comes out very clearly is that the US government has tried its best during this entire case to not aggravate India and not rupture its relations with India. So even though Prime Minister Joe Biden met with Prime Minister Modi during G20 on a one-on-one meeting personally and talked about this case, none of that was reported in the media here or in India. So the US did not take this into the public to embarrass or to aggravate the Indian government. So they kept it under the wraps, they kept it pretty quiet. And when they failed after several months of attempts to get India to cooperate, because India from the very beginning kept saying that it does not indulge in these kind of activities, such accusations were false, especially when they were made by Canada. And then later, when the United States did produce evidence that it had, then the Indian government said, oh, really? Okay, so we will go and investigate. And since November, India has been conducting internal investigations and nothing has been reported so far. But the US during this entire period, for several months, kept it under wrap, tried to sort it out at the level of intelligence officers and all the way up to Biden and Modi. But the US government feels that it has not received any positive cooperations, while they are willing to look the other way in the sense that they are not going to tolerate any country killing Americans in America. That's out of the question. But this has what the US is willing to do is not make a big deal about it at all because they need India and they want to continue to have positive relations with India. But it also means that India cannot continue to pursue this policy. And India has responded by withdrawing many of its raw agents out of the United States. The US has expelled nobody, but India has voluntarily withdrawn. In fact, the person who was in charge of RAW during this operation, Samant Goel, he resigned on the day Nikhil Gupta, the person that RAW hired allegedly to hire a killer. So when he was arrested by authorities, the Czech authorities, that's when the RAW's chief, Samant Goel, resigned his service. There was not much reporting in India. One thing that comes out very clearly in the last 1 year during this entire case, we have seen nothing, no investigative journalism from India. It's perhaps the worst. No wonder India has such a low rating when it comes to press freedom. The Indian media, especially the big houses which have the money to conduct investigations and publish those reports, they are just absolutely useless. I have been saying this again and again. There is no good journalism in India. It's mostly infotainment, and they are more interested, I guess, in pleasing people, and they are very afraid of the government, because I guess in India these days, if you upset the government, either the income tax or the ED will then come and harass you. So maybe Indian media is genuinely afraid of doing any investigative reporting. So nobody in India made the connection when the chief of RAW ended his resigned rather than retire. Especially when there was all this talk going on about RAW's activities overseas. So one thing it does is this article identifies CC1 as Vikram Yadav. So it says Vikram Yadav was a former CRPF or police officer who was brought mid-career into RAW, who was given this particular assignment, and he was in charge of this assignment not only here in the US but also in Canada. Apparently now Mr. Yadav is missing. According to some reports, he was transferred back to CRPF, but nobody is able to find where Mr. Yadav is, because the media, at least the Western media, is looking to interview him. So that is one new fact. So we know who CC1 is now. The second thing is that they have clearly made the case in this article that India's chief of RAW, Samant Goel, was clearly involved in this, and they talk about other cases such as the killing of potential former current terrorists who are hiding in Pakistan. So basically, the article is arguing that India has been conducting these kind of attacks against members of the Indian diaspora in the rest of the world. One thing this article does, which the US has not used in its case, is talk to intelligence officers from other agencies. So they have talked to Australia, where Australians very clearly said they were very unhappy when they found what they call a nest of spies. They found that the Indian RAW agents were spying on the Indian diaspora, and so they shut it down 2 years ago. It is also learned that the British intelligence also caught up with Samant Goel, who at that time, around 2015, was posted in England. And so they also talked to Samant Goel, and then he came back to India. The Germans also talked about engaging with the Indian intelligence service, which was also spying on the diaspora. Basically, Western governments see this as one, harassment of overseas people, violation of the sovereignty, especially if you're not doing this in conjunction and cooperation with the local authorities. And then the most interesting part is when they try to make the case by even talking to former RAW agents that such an investigation, such an operation, could not have been conducted without the knowledge of the director of RAW. So Yadav would not have been able to work on this, especially so much of hundreds of thousands of dollars being promised, $15,000 cash paid, etc. So Yadav could not have run this operation without a go from his chief. But what is also interesting is that such an operation, which involves the United States, can you imagine if RAW agents were actually caught red-handed here in the US? Well, they nearly got caught red-handed, but in an attempt, and they were arrested and put in jail. Can you imagine the scandal that would happen? So to take such a big risk, RAW would have had to go all the way. So the point is being made that such an operation would not have got a go-ahead without the knowledge and okay of the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. Such operations in the past would always go through Doval, and so this also must have gone through Doval. And then through Doval, they make the argument that this goes to the inner circle of the Prime Minister. Well, it can't be more inner than Ajit Doval, who has been the National Security Advisor since 2014. So he is obviously very trusted uh, aide of Prime Minister Modi. And so they go out and talk about how there is this new India, a new India where India is behaving more like Russia and Iran, basically trying to argue that India is behaving like a rogue state. They don't use the word rogue state, but by comparing them with Russia and Iran, they are implying that, because when similar cases have been reported about Iran and Russia, they have been obviously condemned as rogue behavior. In fact, sanctions have been imposed on Iran as well as Russia for basically trying to kill dissidents and critics abroad. And Russia has received a lot of scandalous reporting, and so has Iran. And so eventually, the article ends by reminding everybody of how, at a recent campaign rally in Rajasthan, Prime Minister Modi told thousands of his supporters that today even India's enemies know this is Modi, this is the new India. And this new India, he added, comes into your home to kill you. I think this is a translation of Ghar mein ghus ke marenge. Uh, so, so, so what does all of this mean? Well, what it means is that while there is no rupture in US-India relations, the United States government is internally divided on how to proceed further. They clearly understand the strategic significance of a partnership with with India. They have called it repeatedly as the most consequential relationship of this century that the United States is going to have. So they clearly understand the importance of India as a partner to contain China and strengthen the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. However, there are many others who are unwilling to accept this. They feel that India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi is becoming more and more authoritarian and belligerent. And this kind of behavior from any other country, the United States would have immediately imposed sanctions. The fact that the United States has not sanctioned India, the fact that they have not tried to shame India in public, goes to a great extent to show as to how the United States is accommodating India. It also is a reflection of the rise of India's importance and significance in geopolitics. But there's also an interesting development that clearly Washington Post seems to be unhappy that the US government alerted Indian government that Washington Post was doing such a research and was going to produce a report about 2 months ago without telling Washington Post that they had told this to India. So what must have happened is the Washington Post reporters must have interviewed officials in the US government, at the State Department, National Security Council, and the other intelligence agencies. And as a result of that, somebody from the US government would have told the Indian government. But the right thing to do would have been to tell the Washington Post that we are going to inform India that you're investigating them. So the surprise element would have been lost for journalists who are doing investigative work in India, especially given the fact that India these days is a very unwelcoming place for foreign journalists. So that is another interesting point. It shows two things. It shows that the journalists are worried about doing research in India. And number two, it also shows that the United States is willing to play ball with India to a great extent. There are lots of people I know who will come and who will read this and say, oh, we don't care about the West. We are not interested in the West. How can the West judge us? India itself has said it's rather hypocritical of the United States to criticize India for doing what the US does all the time. And the US government has actually responded in this article to say that the kind of killings that they did were in areas which was ungovernable, such as Afghanistan. But they did kill Bin Laden in Pakistan, unless they want to call Pakistan as ungoverned territory. And so But what India is doing is trying to kill people who are citizens of friendly democracies, and so it's not the same thing. Well, I would also like to add to that by saying that when the United States killed bin Laden and others, they did not hide and deny it. In fact, it is the US which often announced it. So when General Soleimani was killed in Iraq or bin Laden was killed in Pakistan, American presidents took credit for it. And in India, it's been kind of, the media is suggesting that India is doing all these transnational killings, and so they are thinking of this as strength of India or something great. Uh, uh, Killing people in other countries. Well, it's no big deal. You're talking about ghar mein ghus ke marenge. Pakistan has been doing that from the very beginning. The whole attack on Mumbai was ghar mein ghus ke marenge. What else was that? Entering the house and beating up. So other countries have been doing this also, but I guess it's a new and exciting thing for some people in the Indian uh, mainstream media. But the government continues to deny it. And then, so if you think that you're like the US and you're doing it like the US, then why deny it? Stand up and say, yes, we are. Do we see them as threats to our national interest? And we are going to kill them wherever they are. So you can't say both. You can't say at one point that, yes, we will do this and then deny it. I don't understand the point of it. So maybe they want to take credit for domestic purposes and they do not want to be held accountable internationally. I think perhaps that is the strategy. So nevertheless, I think this Pannogate seems to have pretty long legs. It's not getting over. And I think it's not going to get over until India comes up with an investigation that satisfies the US government. And some people are held accountable. And now that the names are in public, there's going to be a lot of demand that Doval and Yadav are held accountable for what they tried to do. Essentially, if they ever come to the United States, they could be arrested and charged with attempted murder. So, so I think that's where this thing is going to go. If US-China relations get worse, if China's behavior becomes more and more aggressive in the Indo-Pacific region, and the US need for a partner like India becomes more and more important, then the US will be more and more willing to let things like this go. But if US-China relations get better and the US feels that it cannot have a partnership with India at any cost, then I think that this will begin to haunt. Eventually, what is going to happen is that there will be a constant tension in the US government on how to pursue. Like you see with Israel, there have been many State Department employees have resigned their position criticizing US policy on ethical grounds, on legal grounds, and there are displeasure in the like near mutiny in the State Department. And it must be very difficult to work, and this is a very stressful part for the US. So a similar thing could happen with India, where a certain element of the US government will emphasize pragmatism and look the other way. But on the other hand, there will be those who are just unwilling to accept India violating the United States sovereignty. Other partners of the United States, whether it is Great Britain or Australia or Germany or Canada, are also unhappy with this. So in that sense, this particular policy is going to backfire. Plus, I don't understand what the problem really is. The Khalistani movement died decades ago. There is no Khalistani movement in India, no big separatist movement. Whatever there is a little bit here in Canada and a little bit in England. In fact, this whole Panno Gate has actually put more energy into the Khalistan movement, at least in the diaspora. So I do not see the wisdom of this strategy where the risk and threat that the Khalistanis present to India is, in my opinion, not very serious. Uh, and, uh, and, and, and a policy that could antagonize members of G7 and G20 who are trying to reach out to India. I don't see the wisdom in this policy at all. So I hope that you found this discussion interesting. So please subscribe to Conversation, like this video, press the bell icon, share it with your social political network. And until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.